Hello, I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
And welcome to the List Makers episode 42. Nothing significant there at all.
No.
A spin-off podcast of The Doctor Who Show where we have a topic, we make some lists, we chat about it. You know the format. Our topic tonight, Rob?
Yes.
Top 5 underrated stories as submitted to the Hat of Rastalon by Rob Irwin.
Quite unknowingly submitted. I sort of just popped it out there as an idea, and next thing it comes out of the hat.
Look, it percolated for a few months in the hat, and then it was drawn out. So, Rob, this is a topic you wanted to do.
Yep, be careful what you wish for, yep.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to go out there, make a big call right at the start. I'm predicting no snaps.
Okay.
What about you?
I'm going to say 1.
All right, so we're both going the low end. Let's see if that reflects our lists. It's my turn to go first. Now, I haven't used any particular metric to decide what an underrated story is, but I did go and compare my choices to the most recent Doctor Who magazine readers poll.
Oh, okay.
Just to sort of get a sense of maybe sort of a gut check or of whether what I think's underrated really is. So I'll be throwing those stats in there, but I didn't have a marker. I didn't say it has to be in the bottom X%. I just said, where do the readers of Doctor Who magazine go? So
that's interesting. I've not been as scientific, so if I name something and people write in and say, Rob, that's in the top bloody 10, I'll feel a little foolish, but hopefully not.
Well, underrated is one of those vague terms, and we'll probably discuss that when we get into the chat, but I'm going to make my list.
Okay.
Number 5, I've gone New Who, and this is one that maybe long-term listeners could predict will be on my list, and that's a story that has a great space location, a great Doctor and companion combination, some interesting ideas, a twisted take on the potential evil of the media, and Simon Bloody Pegg turns up. It's The Long Game, which was 10 out of 10 stories in the poll of the Eccleston era. Doctor Who magazine readers thought this was the worst story in Christopher Eccleston's time as the Doctor. I am genuinely baffled by that. It's got everything you want in Doctor Who. It's got space adventure. It's Eccleston and Rose. It's great guest cast. It's great ideas. You've got the whole Adam subplot where he's doing evil, wicked things and showing what happens when you take as a companion someone who shouldn't be there. I genuinely do not know why this is not better regarded by fans. I think it's really underrated. Number 4, I have gone to the Davison era for another big space adventure with cool ideas that is almost dismissed, almost forgotten, and that is 4 to Doomsday.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Terminus.
No, look, I've defended Terminus before, but I think that's a different sort of kettle of fish. I think 4 to Doomsday, it's a little bit unpolished. We all know that it's Davo's first performance in the role, and when you watch it, you can see he's a little bit less polished than he'll become. And look, it's not a big blow you out of the sky classic. It's not Earthshock. I get that. But the idea is a fascinating one of the different cultures that the Obakans have taken, the plot to invade Earth. It's got the android. It's got a couple of cool cliffhangers. It's not meaty and the most exciting adventure, but I think there's a really solid, well-made story, and it looks good. The costumes are great. The cast is great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a classic, but I think it's underrated. And this was, out of 20 Davison stories, ranked 17th.
Yep.
I'm back to the new series for number 3 and into the Whittaker era for The Witchfinders.
Yeah.
Now, I just think, again, this is one that people really don't appreciate and don't rate it as well as it could be. It's a historical that's actually got a character that we all know and recognise, played in an interesting way. That's King James, of course. He interacts, with the companions of the Doctor in a good way. You've got a bit of a weird, almost fantasy plot going on there. You've got some jokes. You've got some fun. You've got a good, solid adventure there. And look, is it Demons of the Punjab or Rosa? No, but that doesn't mean that it's bad either. It's a good, solid, fun, historical, and it certainly deserves to be better than 11th out of 24th in the Whittaker era.
Okay.
I'm into the Tom Baker era for my number 2 pick, and that is the Android Invasion. I think if this was in any other era, this would be extremely well regarded. It's a fascinating story. Terry Nation does mystery really, really well. And the way that he drops in the clues and the false leads and the way it's filmed in that wonderful location at East Hagbourne, where I have been, it's got a good, solid cast. It's fun, it's got adventures, it's got androids with fingers in their guns. Look, again, is it the Deadly Assassin or the Seeds of Doom or the Pyramids of Mars? No, I get that. But it's still a pretty good, fun story that I will happily put on and watch. I think it is unfairly compared to its neighbours, and I think it is underrated, coming in 28th out of 41 Tom stories.
Okay.
My number one pick, what I think is the most underrated story in all of Doctor Who, I'm going with a story that helps to establish what the show is. It's a wonderful character piece. It's got a really interesting 1960s sci-fi idea at its core. It is The Edge of Destruction.
Ah, yeah.
Again, perhaps overlooked because it's not the first ever story on Unearthly Child. It's not the epic introduction of the Daleks. It's not a great big story like the Keys of Marinus. It's not the first historical or the first existing historical. It's none of those. It's just this little two-part story in there. But its role in creating the Doctor Who that we know and love, telling us more about the TARDIS and introducing those ideas of a sense of sentience to the TARDIS, which would carry on for another 60 years.
Yeah.
The confrontation between Barbara and the First Doctor, which is, you know, for a show that is occasionally mocked for, it was a bit sexist back in the day, you look at how strong a character Barbara was in The Edge of Destruction and how she goes toe-to-toe with the First Doctor and the performance that William Haskell and Jacqueline Hill put into that. It's just fantastic. It's got a mystery. It's a really interesting, wonderful 50 minutes of Doctor Who. I think it deserves a lot more love as part of that founding trilogy. It came 17 out of 24 Hartnells. I think that makes it very underrated. Rob, that is my list. I'll take a breath.
And I'll say 0 snaps.
0 snaps. There you go. I thought that would be the case. So, Rob, let's hear yours.
All right, Dave. In at number 5, I've got State of Decay. And I'm going to start with this Tom story. Because just stop and think, when did you last hear someone rave about it? I mean, when did you hear someone even talk about it at all? It seems to get lost in that general, wow, season 18, it's so different vibe that people have for the season. And on top of that, it's not the Leisure Hive, which kicks things off. It's not Full Circle, where we meet Adric. It's not Warrior's Gate, which is just so weird. And actually, Warrior's Gate could almost have been in this spot. And it's not Keeper of Traken, where we meet Nyssa. It's not Legopolis, which is Tom's finale. It's just kind of forgotten in the season. Yet it's this gothic feeling, horror-friendly thing with, you know, some new background about the vampires and the Time Lords. And I think it deserves better, Dave. So it's in at number 5.
Nice.
In at number 4, I've got Boomtown, and I have my own personal backstory with this one, where basically on first viewing, I didn't like this at all. I didn't like the Slitheen. I particularly didn't like Margaret Slitheen. I didn't like the way the other characters behave. Mickey and Rose were very casual, like, oh yeah, hiya, let's get a motel room and shag, you know. It all just felt very off, like a record had jumped out of its groove, and it was all the characters I knew, but it just didn't work properly. And maybe coming on top of like Dalek, Father's Day, Empty Child, Dr. Dancers. I guess it's similar to State of Decay in my previous entry, because this is a story that just hasn't got the right sort of attention, I think, maybe because of its neighbours in the season. Because I know when I went back to it, I liked it more. And when I went back to it again, I liked it even more. This one's a real grower. And as the Eccleston era drifts further and further away, and there's just this tiny dot in the distance these days, I'd love more people to try this underrated little gem.
Nice.
In at number 3, I've got The Mind Robber. And it's hard when making a list like this to think of how other people rate or even talk about, or maybe don't talk about, as the case might be, stories that you've never had any problem with. I mean, I guess I could have gone to the Dwim list, but I wasn't that scientific. And it's true here. This, I guess, wasn't readily apparent to me until I stopped to think, oh wow, in the mind of fandom, this isn't Power of the Daleks. It's not the War Games. It's not Evil of the Daleks. It's not the Invasion, Tomb of the Cybermen. I don't know, Fury from the Deep, the Macra Terror, Enemy of the World. I mean, tell me you haven't heard all of them mentioned more than the Mind Robber. And I guess to some degree, some of those are among the newer animated releases. Maybe they're more top of mind for people. But even going back in time, the Mind Robber never struck me as being that top tier of Pat or the second tier of Pat. Yet it's such a good, bonkers, super 1960s kind of story. I like it a lot.
I do too.
In at number 2, I've got Carnival of Monsters. And I think your recent Gin and TARDIS episode demonstrated this, Dave, but I think it's absolutely underrated. It's overshadowed, to my mind, by The Time Warrior and Spearhead when we're talking about Holmes writing for Pertwee. In terms of this season, I mean, you've got 3 Doctors, you've got Green Death, they're always going to get the chocolates. Thinking about the Third Doctor's era in general, there's so many other stories that are going to get mentioned, like Inferno or The Demons, and where does it leave this? And yet, Carnival of Monsters is a really neat story. You know, we're on the SS Bernice. What's going on? Suddenly there's Drashigs. What the hell is all this? The revelation of the miniscope. I mean, this is just pure distilled Doctor Who adventure. Why isn't this loved more? So I've thrown it in at number 2.
What's your most underrated story, Rob?
My most underrated, Dave, and I mean, this is all very, personal, I guess. I'm throwing in the God Complex from the Smith era. And I've discussed this on other podcasts we've made because I think there's so much on offer here. I think the premise is simple, but it's solid. Let's do this 1980s hotel, and in each room is each person's fear. But what is underpinning it? And even when we get to the fact it's a Minotaur, and a fantastic looking Minotaur too, we don't even go the whole Naimon path. I think if this was a Disney series, out would have came the member berries. Remember the Naimon? We've got a Naimon. They don't even do that. It's just barely touched upon. And the piece becomes not so much about the Minotaur, but more about the characters we meet and lose along the way, including the Rita character, this devout Muslim who I've said again on other episodes, I think in an episode of The Listmakers, she would have been a great companion. I think this one's terribly underrated. Such a watchable Smith episode, yet it just doesn't get the big mentions from people.
Well, that's a really good list.
Thank you very much. I thought yours was quite charming too.
So a couple of points I've made here. First of all, I had a couple of runners-up I couldn't quite get in my top 5.
Same.
I'll just start them off. Power of Kroll, which I think, look, it's got some issues with how it looks and the fact it's not as good as the other Key to Time stories before, but I think it's a perfectly good Robert Holmes story. Mm-hmm. Wheel in Space, which I think is let down by the fact that episode 3 is probably the weakest of the 6, and it's one of the 2 that exists. But that's a good Cyberman story with lots of spaceships and death and Cybermen, and that came 17th out of all the Troughtons. And Smithy's Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, which I've always thought was just a really fun Matt Smith story, but never gets talked about.
Yeah. My runners-up list, I had Smith and Jones on it. I think that's just a great introduction to Martha. And also Unicorn and the Wasp, which I've always thought is really good, but seems to get panned a bit by people.
Yeah, it does a little bit, doesn't it?
I thought it was charming.
That's interesting. Now, I always like it, Rob.
Yes.
When, as you know, we have no idea what each other's lists are, and we don't coordinate. And I don't think we necessarily sit there and go, oh, well, we've got to make sure we have a balanced list. But we've mentioned across our 10 picks 8 Doctors, stretching from the 1st through to the 13th. And indeed, if you put our also runs on there, it's pretty much a full run across the whole of the series, apart from 6 and 7, I think. So that's really interesting that we've just picked these little stories from all across the show's history, new and classic.
Although that said, I was going to tease you a bit and say, well, you did pick 2 Hartnell stories there, Dave, because, come on, Four to Doomsday is very much a Hartnell story.
I kind of get that, yeah.
It's got that old school vibe, it's got the 3 companions, it could be a Hartnell story, I think.
Yeah, arrive in part 1, wander around. Yeah, look, I get where people are coming from, but it's probably a little bit too, I don't know, it's too 80s to be a Hartnell story. But yeah,
well, certainly the fashion is.
Yeah, well, that's true. But it's a really interesting spread, and what I think the 10 picks we've had seem to have in common to me, I'll see if you agree, is that they all lack a hook.
Okay.
As we've both sort of said or whiffed around, none of them are the one with the one where we introduce someone, the one where somebody departs, the one where this monster shows up. None of them are those stories.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm looking at my list and Boomtown immediately jumps out. They've had some big adventures. It's the one where they've got some downtime in Wales and like Mickey and Rose are off to shag and Jack's going to go off and do this and they're going to recharge the TARDIS and there's not a whole lot going on and then they just bump into a Slovene, you know. Yeah, that's the whole conceit of that story.
In fact, Boomtown is a bit of a cheapie. Mind Robber's a cheapie.
Yeah.
Edge of Destruction's literally a cheapie.
I think God Complex would have been in terms of just one big sort of hotel set. The Minotaur might have taken a bit of money, but otherwise, yeah.
Long Game had sets that were reused. So again, a bit of a cheapie. So maybe that's a bit of a common thing in there as well. These are perhaps more character driven, more ideas driven, and not quite the big spectacles of some of the stories around them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking down my list again. Yeah, agreed completely.
No, that's interesting. The one that I'm surprised by on the list was State of Decay, but because I've always I've already sort of thought of that as a bit of a classic, but maybe that's because I think all of season 18 is a classic. And when you did go through and said, well, it's not Full Circle and it's not Keeper of Traken and it's not Legopolis and it's not Warrior's Gate, which is not necessarily considered a classic by everyone, but is certainly controversial. I thought. Yeah, you're right. Actually, it is a bit of the unsung hero of season 18.
Yeah, and that's why I picked it. I mean, as I said, Warrior's Gate could have almost taken that spot because I think it is so weird. People just kind of maybe watch it once and then back away and are like, I didn't quite get that, and I might not watch that again. But it's actually very good.
Which very, very much sums up my experience with the God Complex, and it's been on my it's been on my to-do list, or sorry, my rewatch list for a couple of years now, because it is one where I watched it at a time I wasn't really enjoying the show, so I sort of like I'm going to work through this season, one episode now and then, and I watched it. I thought, okay, I didn't hate that, but there was a lot going on. I'm not sure what to make of that. I think I might just back away slowly and shut the door and sort of just put it to one side, along with, a bunch of episodes around it I really don't like. And, look, I think this... I've sort of said it 4 times on this podcast over the last 3 years. I've got to rewatch the God Complex, so keep reminding me to do that, Rob.
Yeah, and there are Smith episodes like that for me. What's the one where they've got the gangers? Is that the Also People?
Also People, Rebel Flesh, yes.
Yeah. I'm like that with that episode, for example. I haven't gone back to that for a long time.
I'm quietly confident I hate that one, so I have I'm not worried about my views there, no.
Fair enough. And I did name check Carnival of Monsters, and you've recently done a Gin and TARDIS on that. What did you think of that idea?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's something that the lads and I brought up on that episode, that there's a lot of classic Pertwees that you mentioned before you get to Carnival of Monsters. There's a lot of classic Robert Holmes stories that you get to before you get to Carnival of Monsters. But if this was, the only Robert Holmes story that he wrote in the Pertwee era, I think we'd all be talking about what a great story Robert Holmes wrote for the Pertwee era. It's just, it's overshadowed by Terror of the Autons and Spearhead from Space and The Time Warrior and just, all these classics that he did. But it's actually just, again, there's no hook to it. It's not got a big particular recurring monster or anything that's introduced or taken away or anything like that. It's just a story where you turn it on, an adventure happens, it's fun, it's well made, and then you turn it off. And that's what I think a lot of these stories are. And they're just sometimes not remembered because they're not terrible. You don't turn it off and go, I need to go on the internet and rage about how much I didn't enjoy that story. They're just, that was fun. I enjoyed that. What's for lunch?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you've cracked it, Dave.
I think we have. That was a really good list and an unusual no snaps.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often. But we are running up to the 20-minute mark, so It is time for me to now. I'm in a hotel in Canberra, so I don't have Tellus had a wrestle on with me, but fortunately I planned ahead and picked one out in advance. So I won't go through the charade and just say our next one that was previously picked from the hat is top 5 stories where the Doctor overthrows the government. Oh, gosh. Okay.
That sounds easy when I say it, but I don't know if it will be.
Define government. I mean, we don't have time for that now, but that's the first thought in my head.
Yeah, exactly. When you think about it, I'm Okay, that's going to be a tough one.
Okay.
But we'll find out how we go in a month's time when it's time to make some more lists. Until then, I've been Dave.
I've been Rob.
And we'll make some more lists soon.
Bye.
Goodbye.